I want to thank everyone for joining. My name is Mark Roberts. I'm here with my brother Matt, and we're pretty excited to be hosting our first company webinar on our favorite topic, which is, of course, biodiesel. And in particular, what we want to talk to you about is small-scale biodiesel production. We've been in the business here talking about small-scale biodiesel production for 6 years, and we've had the opportunity to work with a lot of clever people, and we'd like to sort of share with you an overview of what we have come across and learned. So we have a diverse group of people on the line. We actually had people from 5 continents sign up, and I'm not sure if all 5 continents have successfully managed to get on yet.
I think they're struggling.
But what we hope to do here is to provide you with a comprehensive and concise sort of overview and roadmap for understanding and executing your own local small-scale biodiesel program. So the voice you hear now is the guy on the right with the biodiesel. The voice you will hear in the future is the guy on the left with the tractor.
Look a bit frightened there.
So let's just set the agenda. I want to get everybody level set on what is biodiesel. I'm sure we all have a sense of that it's a fuel, but we'll give you a little bit more depth on that. What are the benefits of small-scale biodiesel production, and who or what groups are best situated to derive a great opportunity and benefit from employing small-scale biodiesel? As many of you probably know, there are a lot of myths out there in the world about what biodiesel is and what it'll do to your engine, and I'd like to address just some of the bigger ones so that you can get a scientific perspective as to what exactly is happening when you use biodiesel in any one of your diesel engines. And then I think hopefully you'll leave this conference with a good sense of how you can join the small-scale biodiesel production. We hope to share with you how you can do this as well. And we'll do that by sharing some case studies about real people reaping the benefits of small-scale biodiesel production. So without further ado, what is biodiesel? I'm sure you all know it. Excuse me. Oh, and one more thing before I start. You'll see, I don't know if you can see my arrow, but if you have a question, you can address it to Springboard or all, and then we'll get to those at the end to the extent we still have time. Our goal is to do this in 45 to 50 minutes. So biodiesel. Well, it's biodegradable, non-toxic, renewable fuel. It can be made locally. It can be made easily, and you can make it profitably with the right parameters. It works in any diesel engine, in any ratio, without having to do anything to that engine. This is there that we'll dive into later, but the point of the matter is it'll work in any diesel engine. And it's a mainstream fuel. You will not be the first person to ever use biodiesel if you choose to do so. In the U.S., the EPA and the Department of Transportation have literally conducted hundreds of millions of miles of testing, and they've developed a standard, which is called the ASTM D6751 standard. There's a similar one in Europe, and every country has a standard for biodiesel such that you can sell it to members of the public, and it can be taxed. Those are 2 important things to governments. It can be produced from virtually any vegetable or animal oil. We'll continually come back to this. This is a key characteristic of small-scale biodiesel production, and it's a remarkably efficient fuel. If you put 1 unit of energy into producing biodiesel, you can get more than 5.5 units of energy back. It's called the net energy balance. And to give you some perspective, diesel fuel has a net energy balance of 0.83. So you're actually putting more energy in than you're getting out. And then last, but certainly not least, biodiesel has the lowest carbon footprint of any transportation fuel available. And what I mean by that is, if you make biodiesel out of used cooking oil, it will burn up to 90% less with 90% less CO2 than diesel, and it will emit 50% less particulate matter. You know, both of these stats are important. I'm sure if you've been paying attention, you've heard of this thing called climate change and carbon parts per million in the atmosphere. We're not going to talk about climate change too much, but here on Earth Day, it should be noted that we are at a higher level of parts per million in the atmosphere than we have been for over 1 million years, 400 parts per million. So we believe that if you can use a fuel that will put less CO2 into the air, and it doesn't cost you more, you might as well do it. And from a particulate matter perspective, here in California, the California Air Resource Board estimates that 70% of the cancer risk that the average California faces from breathing toxic air pollutants comes from diesel exhaust. I am sure that statistic is the same all over the world. So that brings it a little closer to home. I mentioned that biodiesel is a mainstream fuel. It is, in fact, a global commodity. In the U.S., last year, we produced and sold 1.7 billion gallons of biodiesel. The industry employed 60,000 people. And because we burned all that fuel, we did not put 10 million tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. So it's a meaningful industry having a meaningful impact today. Now, when most people think about biodiesel, they sort of think about large companies installing large plants and basically trying to emulate what the petroleum industry has spent 150 years and trillions of dollars of investment building out. We don't think that that's the only way to proliferate biodiesel. And in fact, we are biased towards scale biodiesel production. And that's what the rest of this discussion will center around. And so what is small-scale biodiesel production? Basically, it's any model that uses micro facilities, so small-scale facilities, that are production facilities that are safe, they are reliable, and they are easy to operate. You want to have maximum production flexibility, because remember, you can use a lot of different things to turn into biodiesel, and using the thing that costs the least amount will give you the least expensive biodiesel, which will make you the happiest and give you a much higher return on investment on your equipment. Just as an aside, you know, we have most of our customers today use cooking oil because it's the cheapest thing they can get their hands on. But we have people turning camelina, soybean oil, safflower, beef tallow, fish oil. We even have a woman in Indiana who turns duck fat into biodiesel. So the opportunities to make fuel from something that is not classically viewed as a valuable commodity are enormous. And with a small-scale production facility, the relative costs are certainly a heck of a lot less. We're talking thousands instead of tens of millions. And you can do this today. So this is small-scale biodiesel production right there. Those are some very well-built machines that we sell. But I mean, there are other companies that sell small-scale production equipment. And the point of the matter is you can site these things in a small space and operate them with varying degrees of ease of use. This is small-scale biodiesel. Here are some examples of companies large and small and individuals and institutions that are currently making biodiesel and using it in their fleets. So we have restaurants, schools, hotels, prisons, entrepreneurs, brewers. You can see the list here, but the point of the matter is they're all doing this today, and they've found a way to make it profitable for them. Now this is, as I mentioned before, a key characteristic of small-scale biodiesel. You can turn fish oil into biodiesel in the Pacific Northwest. You can turn safflower seeds into biodiesel here in California, soybean oil in Argentina, beef tallow wherever you might be processing meat. There literally are many, many alternative feedstocks that you can use. And if you use them in a production micro facility that looks like this, you have a very small footprint, less than 20 square feet. This is made out of stainless steel with explosion-proof parts, so safety is a requirement. This little machine can make 36,000 gallons of annual capacity, so that's 120,000 liters a year. And that'll save 720,000 pounds of CO2 being put into the atmosphere. And, oh, by the way, it could save over $100,000 in fuel savings here in California. There's a lot of numbers here, and just as an aside, we will have this presentation digitally available for you if you'd like it. So afterwards, you can just send us an email and we'll shoot you a PDF. But if you start on the left-hand side of this slide where it says cost of diesel per gallon, it goes from $3.50 to $4.50 a gallon, and then that's 92 to 119 a liter. In the middle, you see gallons of grease produced. Try and wave this around. 50 to 100 gallons of grease produced and assumedly turned into biodiesel, you're only at half, basically, of our capacity of our smaller unit, the BioPro 190. At a $4 diesel price, you're saving quite a bit of money in the first year of operations. You're also saving quite a bit of CO2 from going to the atmosphere. And if you have a CFO or an accountant or someone else numbers oriented, these are very impressive net present value and IRR returns. So biodiesel is good. Small-scale biodiesel production is a great way to approach proliferation of biodiesel. So how do you get started? This is sort of a checklist that we encourage people to start with. First and foremost, define your feedstock. What is into biodiesel? This is generally the hardest question to answer, and once you've answered it, you're 90% of your way to making fuel. You also want to define your production goals. Is this just for you? Is it for a co-op? Is it for a fleet? Do you need to think about maybe putting together a buyer's group? And we'll give you a little bit more information about a buyer's group here later on. You want to locate your chemicals. Certainly we and some other internet providers can get you some of your chemicals, but methanol is something you'll have to source locally because it costs a lot to ship. And it's pretty easy to get your hands on all over the US and in most countries. This sounds somewhat banal, but you want to decide on where production is going to happen. I can't tell you how many institutions they get bogged down by where will we put this small machine that makes fuel. So figure out how you can do that and come to your organization with a plan of where to put it. And then side stream management. You are going to want to basically plan for and manage glycerin and wastewater. These are the two side stream products, which is a euphemism for waste stream. Neither is hazardous, but you need a plan for both, and we'll give you some information about that. And if you are an institution, I'll say this multiple times, create a monitoring, reporting, and marketing plan to tell the world what you're doing. In general, you will get credit, either marketing credit or institutional credit for being proactive and burning a cleaner fuel than other people are doing right now. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt, and he'll tell you how this stuff is made.
Okay, jumping right in here. So how do you make it? Well, as Mark mentions, there's a lot of different feedstocks that you can convert. Here is a partial list, and it's not even exhaustive. All of these things will convert beautifully into biodiesel. Note that there's animal fats there, and beef farmers take note. Also, mineral oil will not work, nor will citrus oil. But all of these will work beautifully, and research continues. I mean, you can get oil out of nearly anything. The other inputs that you'll need to convert that oil are listed here. And as Mark notes, you can get all of these fairly easily, and getting them locally is helpful. We actually pre-package lye and sulfuric acid, but getting methanol, you should probably source it locally. Water is optional. We'll talk about that in a little while. But also, with most equipment, you do need to plug it in. Our equipment has an electrical draw of about 25 to 30 kilowatt hours per batch, which in California roughly equates to $3 to $4 worth of electricity for every 100 gallons of fuel made. You'll also have to have the right equipment. And if you opt to get ours, great. We won't be let down if you don't. But if you don't, we urge you to focus on a few important features when you are researching your equipment. One of those is your equipment has to be safe. This can't be overvalued because you don't want to end up like this guy. You don't want to cut corners. You don't want to use poly as your tank material. And you want to make sure you use all explosion-proof motors, explosion-proof pumps. Another important feature is you want to make sure you can reliably and consistently make ASTM grade fuel. which, as Mark mentions, is the gold standard in the U.S. And unless you want to make making biodiesel sort of your second job, you'll want to get automated equipment. Here are some accessories that we can recommend. Many of these are luxuries, but I'd say the methanol pump is probably an essential. You can many different sources. You can get a fairly sophisticated one that screws down onto a barrel for about $550. You can get a hand crank pump for about $60. Barrel filters also are important. We recommend that you filter your oil through a 300 micron filter before you put it in our equipment. And that's fairly coarse. I mean, you just want to take out the major bits of food debris before you process the oil. These others are pretty self-explanatory. Having storage, I mean, you're managing liquids. Having storage is a good idea, and it'll help you to increase your production rate. Now, where do you want to put it? People overthink this so much. You don't need to draw blueprints. You could just get a shed. 10 by 10 is really all you'll need to house all of the equipment you'll require, and then presto, you will be able to make ASTM grade biodiesel for 95 cents per gallon if you can collect your cooking oil for free.
So just jumping back for a second, at the outset we mentioned, how much fuel do you want to make? And at Springboard, we historically have been an equipment provider, and we haven't made a lot of fuel except for ourselves. Recently, we've started making fuel and selling it, and as part of that, we looked into how to set up a buyer's club. And what we realized is it's relatively easy, and it's a great way to distribute biodiesel without having to interact with it as many regulatory entities as you do when you've got a pump and you sell to the public. And so we think this works well with a BioPro, with a small-scale production model, and it enables you to help maybe finance the equipment because you've got more people involved, to source your feedstock, be it used cooking oil or farmed crop, and educate the community so that maybe some more people would use biodiesel than might otherwise do so. Now, the big caveat is you got to be organized. You want to have proper documentation for members joining and saying, look, we're a member of a private club. We understand we're getting biodiesel made in this club, and it may not have gone through all of the testing that stuff at the pump goes through. But most importantly, you want to keep the tax man happy. So you have to have records of how much you made and sold and then pay the appropriate taxes. At the end of the day, this still works out quite well in terms of supporting a group of people operating or interacting with a small-scale biodiesel production unit. So if anybody wants further information on that, we're happy to give it to you sort of via email or in a phone conversation after this.
Okay, so side streams. Whenever you have a chemical reaction, you'll always have a byproduct. And in the case of biodiesel, the byproduct is called glycerin. Some people call it glycerol. And some people treat this as a hassle. Others sort of look at it as an opportunity. I was talking to a customer the other day on the phone who said to me, Matt, the money is in the soap. And he actually got our equipment so that he could create glycerin and convert it. And he makes a very high-grade commercial soap that he sells to a broker for. He claims $200 a gallon. But anyways, there's a long list of other things you can do with your glycerin. If you can compost with it. Dickinson College has done some great research into this. Sewage treatment plants often have anaerobic digesters and they welcome it. And you can burn it. We have a glycerin burner. We know a farmer in Pennsylvania warm his barn warm all winter with the glycerin he burns. And wash water is the other side stream. So for every 100 gallons of biodiesel that you'll make in our equipment, you'll use approximately 75 gallons of water to clean it, and put their used wash water down the drain. Check with your local regulators before you do this, or they can gray water it over gravel. Now, the consistency of the wash water is a lot like dishwasher. I mean, it's mostly soap and water. But if you decide you want to just go with a dry wash system, that is what that funny looking black 2-columned device is at the bottom. This is basically a giant filter, and it uses solid media in both of the columns, and it helps you to speed up your production time. So instead of water, you're basically filtering the fuel, and you can make 100 gallons in 13 hours.
All right, so we know how to make it. We know it's good. Biodiesel. Let's touch on a couple of myths and misinformation that's out there. I ran into this personally as I was looking for a new car. I called a car salesman, and I said, I'd really like to run B20 in this vehicle. I was going to run B100, but I didn't want to confuse the guy. And his immediate reaction was to say that biodiesel would void my warranty and would wreck my engine. So that's despite the fact that his company has on its website that they support B20 in all their diesel engines. So you have to be informed, and you have to know what questions to ask these people, and you have to know when to fight and when to just roll your eyes and ignore people. So here are some of the common myths. There are obviously others out there. I don't want to bore you. I will go through this relatively quickly, but you must convert your engine to run biodiesel. Biodiesel will wreck your engine. Biodiesel use will void your warranty. Biodiesel won't work in the winter. So you do not need to convert your engine to run biodiesel. As we mentioned before, it will run in any diesel engine in any ratio without having to do anything. There are obviously caveats to that, one of which is that because biodiesel is an excellent solvent, if you put biodiesel into an older vehicle, it will scour out the fuel lines and deposit all the debris in your fuel filter. And so here we have some fuel filters from a test that somebody did with biodiesel as they converted an old diesel Mercedes to biodiesel. In the first 80 miles, the biodiesel worked like a champ and got a lot of the crud that had accumulated over 200,000 miles of diesel driving and threw it into the fuel filter. The next 120 miles, it did it again, not quite as dramatically, but then the next 200 miles, you can see that the fuel filter looks a lot cleaner. And in fact, if you run biodiesel, a high ratio biodiesel, your fuel filter changes will be a lot less often than diesel once you've done the initial flushing. Oh, and by the way, biodiesel has a very good lubrication effect on your engine. So in the US, you have to use ultra low sulfur diesel. The sulfur has been taken out. That historically was the lubricant for your engine and why your engine went 500,000 miles. With ultra low sulfur diesel, the longevity is not as much unless you put a lubricant in like biodiesel. So biodiesel will wreck your engine. Again, that's not the case. I should have jumped the gun here. In fact, there's more lubricity than ULSD. There is, however, every manufacturer of an engine has a public position on biodiesel. You can find that public position here at this website. An easy way is to go to www.nbb.org, which is at the back here, and they've got all kinds of information about what engine manufacturers say about biodiesel. I'm not sure if you can see this, but here you see the OEMs broken down into OEMs that support B5, B20, and B100. I will tell you anecdotally that if a manufacturer supports B5, that manufacturer will support B20. So if you have a direct conversation with your car sales guy and say, look, I'm running B20 in this, or I'm going to buy a different brand, I guarantee you they'll say it's fine to run B20. If you're a fleet manager and you want to buy a lot of vehicles, you have a lot of negotiating power on this. Why? Because biodiesel is not a fringe fuel. It has a certification. And I think in many cases, automobile manufacturers are worried about people making fuel in their basement that's not good fuel, putting it in the car and creating Biodiesel will void your warranty. So in the U.S., this in fact is illegal. You can't void a warranty if you use to specification fuel. So you can hear, even if the manufacturer recommends a blend of 5% and you use higher, it cannot void the warranty. However, I'm sure not many of us want to spend our free time in litigation with large, well-capitalized automobile manufacturers. And so you really want to understand what the manufacturer has to say about biodiesel, why, and whether or not you're comfortable going outside their recommendation. Again, Matt will talk later about one of our customers who has a 2012 Mercedes Sprinter, where Mercedes says you shouldn't use anything greater than 5% in this vehicle, and he's been using 100% for 40,000 miles with no problems. Finally, biodiesel doesn't work in the winter. Well, biodiesel does gel at a higher temperature than diesel. However, we have people using biodiesel in Alaska and northern Canada in the winter. And basically what they do is they blend it with diesel fuel. So B100, 100% biodiesel gets blended down to, say, B10 if it's really, really cold. This allows you still to save money because you're making your own fuel for less than the price of diesel, and it's also environmentally beneficial and good for your engine. So if you get past all those myths and you're ready to jump into biodiesel for the first time, what should you expect? I had this conversation with a fleet manager locally here, and he was very concerned about what this would do to his miles per gallon and his actual exhaust, what it looked like. So in a nutshell, you should expect a decrease in exhaust smoke. You should plan for at least 2 fuel filter changes. That will cost you about $20. You should budget a 1 to 2% mile per gallon reduction depending on the fleet makeup. And that's because biodiesel has, when you run it at B20 anyways, has about 1% less BTUs than diesel. If you're a fleet manager, you want your boss to know this and just basically incorporate the math into your new evaluation matrix. And you should create a cold weather usage plan. This is a good template to start out from. Use B in the U.S. anyways. Use B100 from April to October. Use B20 from October to April, and B10 when it's really cold. And of course, there's some additives as well that you can use. We've had good success with Wintron XC30, but the other 2 also are said to work quite well. And again, monitor and report your usage. You will benefit from it. And then this is just to make you feel good that you are not breaking a lot of new ground using biodiesel. You've got some large multinational corporations that have been using biodiesel for years and use it every day. Just as an aside, the U.S. Marine Corps and the Navy are the 2 biggest users of biodiesel fuel in the world.
Okay, so in the agenda we promised we'd talk about who can benefit from small-scale biodiesel. And a catchphrase that we like here is captive kitchens. So that is any group or institution that is right at the source of oil, or used cooking oil. They feed people as part of their business, and rather than get paid, say, 25 cents or 50 cents on the gallon to have it picked up, they opt to convert it themselves for a much bigger savings. But that said, I'm going to start off with some individuals who are industrious, and they collect cooking oil locally. Paul Waxman is in Maryland. There's a picture of himself with his family, and he gets very good mileage in those 2 vehicles that he runs B100 in. And I just love the fact that his kids have never actually been to a filling station. He sent me an email the other day, and I have a little quote from it. He says, "We live in a community where we test jets for the Navy. One of their bumper stickers is jet noise, the sound of freedom. My bumper sticker, biodiesel, the smell of freedom." So we love Paul. Mike Wills is a diesel mechanic down in Fresno, and he's made over 50,000 gallons of biodiesel in his equipment, and he saves $2.67 per gallon. So if you do the math, he saved over 133,000 gallons since he first got his equipment. But those guys are sort of mavericks. restaurants are more in the target area. There's so many, from little tiny restaurants in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, to giant estates in North Carolina. I'm going to single out Sam Menelakis up there on the top left, who's filling up his Mercedes Sprinter with B100. And as Mark mentioned, he uses B100 year-round, and he makes his fuel for, he says, $1 a gallon. Schools are such a perfect group to take advantage of small-scale biodiesel. They have to feed not only the minds but the stomachs of those students, and they can easily collect their oil and convert it on campus. And as we all know, a lot of colleges and universities are very progressive. They are self-mandating that they reduce their CO2 footprint over time. Well, with very little infrastructural change, they can do that and save money at the same time. But a third benefit for schools is they can incorporate the equipment into their various curricula. We work with chemistry departments, ecology departments, several ag departments, and even an engineering class can study the equipment. Farmers is another large group. Nearly every farmer out there has a percentage of his harvest that is inedible or doesn't meet FDA spec. Any farmer can collect that unused percentage of the harvest, crush it, collect the oil, and then process it. But after the oil is extruded with something called a seed press, the remaining high-protein bran can be sold to brokers who collect cattle feed. Johnny Davis is the guy, top row, holding the mason jar of biodiesel. He is a semi-retired farmer. He lives in DeWitt, Arkansas, and he operates some equipment that will make 100 gallons of biodiesel every 13 hours. And he is one of several farmers in the Arkansas Delta that are converting camelina and some other winter crops. Now, the interesting thing about camelina is it's not for human consumption, so it doesn't compete with food grains. It thrives in cold temperatures when other crops can't grow. And it's also very rich in omega-3 acids, which make the chaff very high-quality animal feed. But Johnny, when he cannot convert a seed crop, he actually collects used cooking oil from restaurants in town and puts his equipment to work that way. Prisons, another great group. Talk about captive kitchens and cheap labor, and the hospitality industry. And here we're thinking about resorts and casinos. All those tourists, they have to be fed. That oil can easily be collected and converted. And lastly, municipalities makes for a great case study. This is the group in Daphne, Alabama. They have a population of 22,000, and back in 2007, they got tired of having to clean up sewer spills and react to maintenance issues, which they figured were from constricting pipes. And they figured that, they're already collecting trash and recycling on trash day. Why don't they start collecting grease? So they started this Cease the Grease program, and before they knew it, they had an awful lot of used cooking oil in their hands. They did a little more research, got some of our equipment, and they've been making biodiesel ever since. They say they save about $10,000 on fuel every year, and more than double that on sewer maintenance averted.
So that's bringing us towards the end here of this webinar. It's pretty broad, obviously, and you may well have, I do see some questions here in the top line that we can definitely get to. I'm sure you've heard of us because you had to come to our homepage to register. We'll just remind you that we're in the business of selling equipment that enables small-scale biodiesel production, but we're also in favor of just more biodiesel, replacing more diesel wherever possible. I think the economics of small-scale biodiesel, as you've heard hopefully today, complement the environmental benefits greatly, and it's one of the few alternative fuels where you actually get paid for doing it. All solar and wind have had a struggle to get down to grid parity. We're well below grid parity, at the risk of comparing apples to oranges. Last but not least, I will leave you with this slide, which has got some pretty interesting links that will help you learn a little bit more about biodiesel, small-scale biodiesel, and other stuff that's of interest to us that we find ourselves referencing quite frequently. And then maybe now we can spend a couple minutes just looking at some questions here.
Chris had a good question. He asked about DPF technology.
Yeah, and that is an excellent question, one we get asked a lot. And so there's a number of ways of tackling this, right? There is no doubt that DPF technology, which is what newer vehicles from about 2008 on have been forced to put into their cars because of California's emissions laws. And so what manufacturers do, they say, well, I'm not going to just do it for California. This is going to become my new standard. So they do something called DPF, and it's a diesel particulate filter. So what it's supposed to do is to remove the soot from the exhaust. And the way they do this is they inject vaporized fuel into the engine chamber during ignition. The problem with that for biodiesel is that biodiesel has a very high flash point, about 345 degrees compared to diesels at 165. So there are instances where the biodiesel, if you put in vaporized B100, it may not burn as it's supposed to. And if it doesn't burn, what will happen is it will go to the sides of the piston and it will leak into the crankcase oil. This sounds like and it's definitely suboptimal. However, if you want to use B100 in a DPF engine, you can. What you need to do is be very attentive to your oil levels. So what I have heard people do is that they check their oil level every 1 or 2 fill-ups, and they basically change their oil out between every 2,500 and 3,000 miles. Different people have different ways of approaching this. However, the easiest way to approach it is to use 20% biodiesel and 80% diesel, which will work in a DPF engine.
Also, it's worth stressing that that's not a common situation. DPF vehicles were, many of them were made from 2007 to 2009. A lot of them don't have DPF tech on them, but it's easy to manage if they do.
I saw another question here in Spanish, which is not a language I'm good at, but I think it says that methanol is not easy to get in Colombia. Can you use ethanol? The answer to that is yes, you can use ethanol, but it's a somewhat different process. Ethanol is a bigger molecule, and so the recipe you use to make biodiesel changes. You use more of some things, less of others. And it's very hard to get ethanol that's 99%, what do you call it, pure, i.e. it has a little water in it, and that's difficult to make biodiesel with. That being said, I think this question comes from Colombia. I know that Colombia has a pretty strong local biodiesel industry, so it'll be interesting to see how they source their methanol. But again, it's worthy of further study.
So here's another question from Cornelius about FFA limits. How much FFA can be in the oil before you can't convert it? So our equipment, the BioPro equipment, can convert any oil that is 5% FFA or less. Now, FFA just stands for free fatty acid content, and that is a measurement of the acidity or rancidity of the oil. We actually have had people convert oil that is 8 and 9% FFA in our equipment, but in order to do that, you have to dry the oil quite thoroughly. So if in Cornelius's example, you have 10% FFA oil, well, you would want to blend it with cleaner oil, or you could go through a process to drop the FFA. And we can talk about this. If anyone's interested, we can exchange email or talk about this later, but you can do sulfuric acid baths to the oil that will lower the FFA. You can also filter it more finely. And as you remove the particles, a lot of the acids stick to those, and you can reduce the FFA that way.
But just as an aside, you can turn biodiesel, you can turn low quality used cooking oil into biodiesel if you throw enough money and time at it. So at some point it becomes, the return is just not good enough and people won't spend the money to do that. But I know that, I've heard, you can get as high as 20%. It's just, you can't do that with a Bio Pro. You're going to need a lot of what is called pre-processing equipment. So hopefully that helps. That helps with that answer. Do you do titration?
We have information on our website about how to titrate. There's a couple different methodologies, and we describe those. We also make something called go-no-go kits, which is sort of titration made easy. And how these work is they're little bottles of pink liquid. Let's say you're behind a restaurant and you want to quickly test the oil there. You take out your little dropper, you take a little sample of the oil, and you drop in 1 milliliter of oil into this little container, and you shake it up. If the liquid is pink and doesn't change color, then you know you're good. You know it's a go. And if it does change color, becomes yellow, it's a no-go. So we've tried to make that as easy as possible, but there's always full-on titration as well.
There's one other question that came in the other day, actually, which I just thought I'd surface for everybody. We did talk about not using water and using a dry resin compound. It's called the dry wash, so you don't have to use water, and that's a great solution. The one caveat is that it relies on methanol to activate one of the resins, and so what happens is you end up with finished fuel that has a slightly higher methanol content than ASTM grade biodiesel. In point of fact, this doesn't generally make a difference. You couldn't tell the difference, but it would mean that you couldn't sell the fuel, and it's just good disclosure for people who are thinking about maybe doing their processing quicker and without water.
You can definitely overdo it with your KOH or sodium hydroxide. Our manual is pretty detailed regarding the recipe we recommend, but with our equipment, as with other equipment, you can oftentimes go off the beaten path and use manual functionality. And so, if you wanted to experiment with different blends of methanol and lye, you're able to do that.
All right. Well, listen, we both want to thank all of you for hanging in there, for navigating joinme.com, and for listening to the webinar. If you would like a digital copy, shoot us an email, mark@springboardbiodiesel.com and/or matt@springboardbiodiesel.com, and we will fire you out a PDF that you can go through again. And if you have any other questions, we're always here. We're always happy to talk about biodiesel. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of Earth Day.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.